coming now to the point that I warned Tony I wanted to stress, and we're going to talk about later, of the famous observation made by Stephen Jay Gould, wonderful biologist and paleontologist, that religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria, as he put it. There's no necessary reason why they should be in conflict. The two ideas can coexist in the same mind. I was a great admirer of Gould's, but I think I want to disagree, and here's how. Of course, a great scientist can also be a person of faith. Joseph Priestley, for example, who more or less discovered oxygen, as we understand it, and whose laboratory was smashed for profanity by monarchist and loyalist mobs in Birmingham and drove him over to Philadelphia. He was a Unitarian, a great man of science and the Enlightenment, but he believed in the phlogiston theory. Alfred Russel Wallace, who did most of Darwin's early work for him, not just on selection, but on continental drift as well, working to your near north that you used to call the Far East, Indonesia, loved nothing better than spiritualist seances. Really liked a bit of table turning and table rapping and burblings from the beyond to sweeten his day. The greatest scientist Cambridge ever produced, possibly, arguably, Sir Isaac Newton, was an alchemist, kept a furnace permanently going in his rooms, which he several times set fire to, in case the moment would come when he would work out how to turn lead into gold. Believed that the Catholic Church was the Antichrist, may have been onto something. Was obsessed with the measurements of he thought it would be better to know the measurements of the original temple than to find out about gravitational theory. Anyway, but a great scientist. It goes on. And there were many brilliant German physicists, rivals and contemporaries of Einstein, working in the same field, who believed that there was Aryan science and Jewish science, and there were two different types of physics. So, of course, these things can coexist. But it seems to me that it's not a matter of their coexistence or their overlap as to whether or not they are compatible, whether or not they're ultimately reconcilable. For example, I'm talking now not just about what people think, but about how. It was a Catholic, not just a Catholic physicist, but actually a man in holy orders, Georges Lemaitre of the University of Louvain, who in the 20s anticipated the idea of the Big Bang, quarreled with Einstein about it. Said that he didn't call it the Big Bang, that comes later. He thought of it as the egg from which the universe suddenly burst. And was right. And Einstein had to admit that he was probably the first to get onto this use of the theory of relativity. He took it to the Pope. Pope Pius XI it was, and the Pope was so impressed, being warned that this theory was likely, that he offered to Father Lemaitre, Professor Lemaitre, he said, if you like, I'll make it dogma. I'll say that people have to believe it. So actually, very nice of you, Your Holiness, but that would be sort of missing the point of a scientific experiment. That's what I mean by saying this mentality is not congruent, not compatible. It's not really reconcilable.
It will happen to all of us that at some point you'll get tapped on the shoulder and told, not just that the party's over, but slightly worse, the party's going on, but you have to leave. And it's going on without you. That's the reflection, I think, that most upsets people about their demise. All right then, because it might make us feel better, let's pretend the opposite. Instead, you'll get tapped on the shoulder and told, great news, this party's going on forever, and you can't leave. You've got to stay. The boss says so, and he also insists that you have a good time. The father proposed by monotheism is the father who doesn't die, who reassures his children, don't worry, I'll never leave you. You'll never see the end of me. You'll never get the chance to feel sorry. I'm always there. I'm the absolute ultimate in dictatorship, and in my courts there's no appeal. Do you really think that this would cheer up anyone of sentience or humanity or capable of feeling about any? I submit it's out of the question.
What? Oh, there is no hope for the left. There's no hope for the left as long as questions like that can be asked of someone like me. I mean, if you're asking me, there is no hope for the left. You might want to think of an answer rather than a question there. And I think the first rule would be the one I never tire of, which is the one of Eugene Debs, which is don't ask that. Don't be a follower. Don't look for a leader. If he could lead you into the promised land, he could lead you out. Do your own thinking. And dispense with these characters who, with SDI and with Serbia and with China and with all these other countries, show that they think of you as completely dispensable statistics, as people who are disposable and so on, and learn instead to think of the leaders in the same way as they think of you. That would be progress.
I'm sorry to have to begin by disagreeing with His Grace. If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. Now, you might ask, you're fully entitled to ask, brothers and sisters, who am I to say that? Well, in the Jubilee Millennium Year of 2000, the Vatican spokesman, Bishop Piero Marini, said, explaining a whole sermon of apology given by His Holiness the Pope, given the number of sins we've committed in the course of 20 centuries, reference to them must necessarily be rather summary. Well, I think Bishop Marini had that just about right. I'll have to be summary too. His Holiness on that occasion, it was March the 12th, 2000, if you wish to look it up, begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America, the African slave trade, the admission that Galileo was right, and for silence during Hitler's final solution, or Shoah. And it doesn't end there. There are smaller but significant, equally significant, avowals of a very bad conscience. These have included regret for the rape and the torture of orphans and other children in church-run schools in almost every country on earth, from Ireland to Australia. These are very serious matters, and they're not to be laughed off by references to the occasional work of Catholic charities. But I draw your attention not just to the apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but to the evasive and euphemistic form that they take. Joseph Ratzinger, the current Pope, considered by some, by Catholics, to be the Vicar of Christ on earth, in his comment, one of the few he's made, on the institutionalization of rape and torture and maltreatment of children in Catholic institutions, he has said, it's a very severe crisis which involves us, he said, in the following: in the need for applying to these victims the most loving pastoral care. Well, I'm sorry. They've already had that. And to say that this is the responsibility laid upon you by the horrific admission that you've already had to make is not accepting responsibility in any adult sense. The same euphemism comes in the term some Christians allowed themselves to be deceived in this way and to act against the gospel. Well, anti-Semitism was preached as an official doctrine of the Church until 1964. Do you think that might have something to do with public opinion in Austria and Bavaria and Poland and Lithuania? There'll come a time when the Church will issue apologies and explanations and half-baked appeals for forgiveness for things it's still doing. I think that there will be an apology for what happened in Rwanda, the most Catholic country in Africa, where priests and nuns and bishops are on trial for inciting from their pulpits and on the church's radio stations and newspapers the massacre of their brothers and sisters. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way. I say it in the presence of His Grace, and I say it to His face. The preachings of His Church are responsible for the death and suffering and misery of millions of His brother and sister Africans, and He should apologize for it. He should show some shame. For condemning my friend Stephen Fry for his nature, for saying you couldn't be a member of our church. You're born in sin. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join our church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman. It's obscene. And it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. For shame, for shame. I don't wish any ill on any fellow primate or mammal of mine, so I don't at all look forward to the death of Joseph Ratzinger. I don't. Or any other pope, not really. Except for one tiny reason which I ought to confess and share with you. When he dies, there's quite a long interval till the conclave can meet, and for that whole time, that whole interval, it's a delicious, lucid interlude, there isn't anyone on earth who claims to be infallible. Isn't that nice? All I want to propose in closing is this, that if the human species is to rise to the full height that's demanded by its dignity and by its intelligence, we must all of us move to a state of affairs where that condition is permanent. And I think we should get on with it. Okay, thank you for having me. Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship, a kind of divine North Korea. Greedy, exigent, I would say more than exigent, greedy for uncritical praise from dawn till dusk, and swift to punish the original sins with which it so tenderly gifted us in the very first place. However, let no one say there's no cure. Salvation is offered. Redemption, indeed, is promised at the low price of the surrender of your critical faculties. Religion, it might be said, must be said, would have to admit, makes extraordinary claims, but though I would maintain that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, rather daringly provides not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary supernatural claims. Therefore, we might begin by asking, and I'm asking my opponent as well as you when you consider your voting, is it good for the world to appeal to our credulity and not to our skepticism? Is it good for the world to worship a deity that takes sides in wars and human affairs? To appeal to our fear and to our guilt, is it good for the world? To our terror of death, is it good to appeal? To preach guilt and shame about the sexual act and the sexual relationship, is this good for the world? And asking yourself the while, are these really religious responsibilities, as I maintain they are? To terrify children with the image of hell and eternal punishment, not just of themselves, but of their parents and those they love. Perhaps worst of all, to consider women an inferior creation. Is that good for the world? And can you name me a religion that has not done that? To insist that we are created and not evolved in the face of all the evidence. To say that certain books of legend and myth, man-made and primitive, are revealed, not man-made code. Religion forces nice people to do unkind things, and also makes intelligent people say stupid things. Handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord? No. It is, as the great physicist Steven Weinberger has very aptly put it, In the ordinary moral universe, the good will do the best they can, the worst will do the worst they can. But if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion.
Religion for so many centuries made the mistake of saying, no, if you don't believe, we're going to burn you at the stake because we're right. And now atheists are telling us, if you actually believe in something, you are a stupid, uneducated, primitive, backwoods Neanderthal.
There is no God but God, and Allah is his messenger. You notice the first 4 words are exactly right. So 5 times a day, millions of people around the world unknowingly speak 4 words of complete truth.
America was never guilty of religious wars, of going and slaughtering people in the name of the Christian God.
Anyway, we weren't spared religious war. To say we're exempt from religious warfare in this country is nonsense.
We all know that secular atheistic utopias killed more people in the 20th century than all the world's religions combined.
Adolf Hitler says that his work against the Jews is done on the direct instruction and inspiration of Almighty God.
The Jewish afterlife is right here. The wolf shall lie with the lamb. A child will lead a predatory animal without being harmed.
Maybe the lion will lie down with the lamb, but the lamb won't get much sleep.
Let's stop saying that if you have religious zeal and passion, you're going to shove it down people's throats. It's a lie.
Call someone an imam or a priest or a reverend, there's nothing they can't get away with in our culture.
But to say that atheism is a panacea for all of this, and it's perfect, come on.
These are the beliefs on which monotheism has based itself and upon which it continues to exert its extraordinary and lethal power.
Thus, it is only this world that matters. It is the justice, the righteousness, and good deeds in this world that matters.
He shares that birthday with 2 other people that are extremely important to us, Thomas Jefferson and Madalyn Murray O'Hair. Both were also born on April 13th. If I lose my composure a little, forgive me. Chris Rich is very important to me, and I think he's very important to a lot of us. And this is what he said to us. Dear fellow unbelievers, nothing would have kept me from joining you except the loss of my voice, at least my speaking voice, which in turn is due to a long argument I am currently having with the specter of death. Nobody ever wins this argument, though there's some solid points to be made while the discussion goes on. I have found, as the enemy becomes more familiar, that all the special pleading for salvation, redemption, and supernatural deliverance appears even more hollow and artificial to me than it did before. I hope to help defend and pass on the lessons of this for many years to come. But for now, I have found my trust better placed in 2 things: the skill and principle of advanced medical science and the comradeship of innumerable friends and family, all of them immune to the false consolations of religion. It is these forces, among others, which will speed the day when humanity emancipates itself from the mind-forged manacles of servility and superstition. It is our innate solidarity, and not some despotism of the sky, which is the source of our morality and our sense of decency. That essential sense of decency is outraged every day. Our theocratic enemy is in plain view. Protean in form, it extends from the overt menace of nuclear-armed mullahs to the insidious campaigns to have stultifying pseudoscience taught in American schools. But in the past few years, there have been heartening signs of a genuine and spontaneous resistance to this sinister nonsense. A resistance which repudiates the right of bullies and tyrants to make the absurd claim that they have God on their side. To have had a small part in this resistance has been the greatest honor of my lifetime. The pattern and original of all dictatorship is the surrender of reason to absolutism and the abandonment of critical, objective inquiry. The chief name for this lethal delusion is religion. ways of combating it in the public sphere, just as we have learned to free ourselves of it in private. Our weapons are the ironic mind against the liberal, the open mind against the credulous, the courageous pursuit of truth against the fearful and abject forces who would set limits to investigation and who stupidly claim that we already have all the truth we need. Perhaps above all, we affirm life over the cults of death and human sacrifice and are afraid not of inevitable death, but rather of a human life that is cramped and distorted by the pathetic need to offer mindless adulation, or the dismal belief that the laws of nature respond to wailings and incantations. As the heirs of a secular revolution, American atheists have a special responsibility to defend and uphold the Constitution that patrols the boundary between church and state. This, too, is an honor and a privilege. Believe me when I say that I am present with you, even if not corporeally, and only metaphorically in spirit. Resolve to build up Mr. Jefferson's wall of separation and don't keep the faith. Sincerely, Christopher Hitchens.
Day blast. In my opinion, a very, very important bridge was crossed, and Islam ceased to be a matter merely of its adherents in Muslim countries and became the problem of everyone who lives in a non-Muslim country too. Because on that day, the theocratic head of a foreign state, in this case Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini, offered a large sum of money and a ticket to paradise in his own name to suborn murder, specifically to suborn murder of a writer of fiction, a friend of mine, named and a former guest of yours, I understand, Salman Rushdie, for the crime of writing a work of fiction in the capital city of the United Kingdom, London.